A millionaire is heartbroken to find his missing son living in a landfill next to his former housekeeper. The devastating scene reveals years of suffering, hunger, and unwavering love between the two. But, investigating the past, he discovers that the disappearance was not an accident, but a betrayal within his own home. What he uncovers about the boy's origin forever changes everything he believed about love, guilt, and redemption. The sun beat down on the city of London that December afternoon. Roderick Alistair adjusted his sunglasses as the driver steered the armored Mercedes through the congested streets of the city of London. At 50 years old, the businessman gazed through the window at the brutal contrast that defined the United Kingdom's largest metropolis. Mirrored skyscrapers reflecting the light next to makeshift shacks on the pavements. "How long until we reach the site, Julian?" he asked without taking his eyes off the window. "About 20 more minutes, sir. Traffic is heavy on the M25. Roderick nodded, checking notifications on his phone. It was another normal day for the CEO of Alistair Construction, one of the largest construction companies in the country. Or it would have been, if not for the announcement of his most ambitious project to date, the revitalization of a degraded area in the east end of the city, transforming it into a sustainable residential and commercial complex. The press was already speculating about the billion-pound investment, but behind the serious and calculating demeanor that graced business magazines, Roderick carried a pain that money could not erase. 6 years ago, his son Matthew, then just 5 years old, had disappeared. Searchers mobilized the police, private detectives, rewards were offered, but the boy seemed to have been swallowed by the world. The only concrete clue was that he had run away voluntarily. Taking a backpack with some clothes and the little money he kept in his piggy bank. "We've arrived, sir." Roderick awoke from his thoughts when the car stopped. They were in front of a huge rusted metal gate. In the background, one could see what would soon be the largest undertaking of his career, a plot of over 200,000 square meters adjacent to the old East London landfill, deactivated just 2 years prior. "Have the engineers arrived yet?" he asked, adjusting his Italian silk tie. "They are waiting in the temporary office container, sir." Roderick got out of the car, immediately feeling the characteristic smell that still lingered in the air. Despite environmental containment efforts, some recycling pickers worked in the distance, ignoring the no-entry signs scattered around the perimeter. It was a common sight. Although technically closed, the landfill still attracted vulnerable people who survived on what they found there. "We'll have to increase security," he commented to his assistant who was waiting at the entrance. "We can't start construction with people circulating in the area." "Yes, sir. We are already arranging an additional team for the perimeter." As they walked towards the temporary office, Roderick observed the desolate landscape. It was hard to imagine that in 2 years that place would be transformed into an urban oasis, with smart buildings, green areas, and high-end commerce. This was his talent, seeing potential where others saw only degradation. Suddenly, a scream cut through the air. "Help! Someone, please." It was a child's voice, coming from somewhere among the partially covered piles of rubbish in the more distant area. "Did you hear that?" Roderick asked, stopping abruptly. The assistant nodded, concerned. "It sounds like a child." "Must be one of the scavenger's children." Roderick hesitated. It wasn't his responsibility. The social assistance team accompanying the project would eventually take care of it, removing the families still illegally using the space. But something in that voice touched him in a way he couldn't explain. "Go ahead. Tell the engineers I'm delayed. I need to check this." "Sir, it's not safe to walk alone here. Let me call security to—" "Now, Charles," he interrupted firmly. Reluctantly, the assistant headed towards the container while Roderick walked in the direction of the screams, which continued intermittently. As he got closer, the businessman felt his heart race, a sense of urgency that didn't match his usual business coolness. After rounding a pile of rubble, he finally spotted the source of the screams, a small makeshift structure made of plastic sheeting, cardboard, and pieces of wood. At the entrance, a thin boy in tattered clothes and long hair was trying to drag a bucket of water out. "Please, wake up. You need to drink water." Roderick approached cautiously. "Hello? Do you need help?" The boy turned, startled. His wide eyes showed terror at seeing a well-dressed man approaching. It was evident that he lived in extreme poverty, skin marked by wounds, alarming thinness, ingrained dirt. But there was something in that gaze. "My mum is very ill," the boy said, his voice trembling. "She can't get up." "I'm trying to give her water, but—" Roderick moved closer, feeling a strange familiarity he couldn't explain. "The boy must be around 11 years old," he estimated. "I can help. I have a car nearby." "We can take your mum to a hospital." The boy hesitated, clearly suspicious. "Are you from the council? Are they going to separate us?" "I won't let them take my mum." "I'm not from the council. I'm here for work. I just want to help." After a moment of indecision, the boy seemed to accept the offer. "Please then." "She's very weak." Roderick bent down and entered the small improvised dwelling. The interior was surprisingly organized, considering the circumstances. There was a partition made of cardboard, creating a bedroom area where, on an old mattress, an unconscious woman lay. Her face was sunken, her cheeks hollowed by extreme thinness. She wore several layers of clothing despite the heat, probably to compensate for her lack of weight. As he approached to check her vital signs, Roderick froze. Even malnourished, even with the years having taken their cruel toll, he recognized her. "Louisa," he whispered, incredulous. The woman did not respond. Her breathing was weak, irregular. The boy approached, holding a makeshift water glass made from a cut bottle. "You know my mum?" Roderick couldn't answer. His world was turning upside down. Louisa Ferris had been a housekeeper in his home for almost 5 years. He had fired her after accusations made by his then-wife, Christine, that she was trying to seduce him. But what shocked him most wasn't finding her there in that deplorable situation. It was the boy, those eyes. The shape of his face even obscured by dirt and thinness. The way he slightly tilted his head when asking a question. What is your name?" he asked, his voice almost fading. "Matthew," the boy replied. Matthew Ferris. Roderick's world collapsed. His missing son was right there in front of him, calling someone else mum, living in subhuman conditions in a landfill. Questions exploded in his mind. How? Why, what happened? "Matthew saw you," he stammered, extending a trembling hand towards the boy's face, who instinctively recoiled. "How do you know my mum's name?" the boy asked defensively. Before Roderick could answer, Louisa moved slightly and groaned. Her eyes opened with difficulty, unfocused by weakness. "Matthew," she murmured. "Who's there?" "A man who says he knows you, Mum. He wants to help." When Louisa managed to focus her gaze and saw Roderick, her face transformed into a mask of terror. She tried to get up, only to fall back onto the mattress. "No. Don't take him, Betty, please." "Louisa, what's going on here?" Roderick asked, his voice choked with emotion. "This is my son. My son who disappeared 6 years ago." The boy looked confused from one adult to the other. "What is he talking about, Mum?" Louisa began to cry silently. I tried to give him back. I swear I tried." Roderick was stunned, torn between anger, confusion, and the relief of finding his son alive. "Did you kidnap him? Is that it? All this time?" "No." Louisa managed to protest, with more strength than seemed possible in her debilitated state. "He found me. He ran away to look for me." Matthew protectively placed himself in front of Louisa. "Don't talk to my mum like that. She's looked after me all these years. She barely eats so I can eat." The situation was too surreal for Roderick to fully process. His son, whom he had searched for tirelessly for 6 years, was defending the woman who had supposedly kept him away from home all this time. "We need to take her to the hospital," he finally said, choosing to deal with the immediate emergency. "After that, we'll talk about everything." "I'm not going anywhere without my mum," Matthew stated, determined. "She's coming with us," Roderick assured him. "Both of you will receive all the necessary assistance." Carefully, Roderick took Louisa in his arms. She was alarmingly light, almost like a rag doll. Matthew picked up a worn plastic bag, apparently containing the few valuable possessions they owned. "Your wife," Louisa murmured, as Roderick carried her out of the shack. "She'll keep us apart again." "Christine is no longer my wife," he replied dryly. "We separated years ago." Something akin to relief passed over Louisa's emaciated face before she closed her eyes again. As they walked back towards the car, Roderick watched Matthew out of the corner of his eye. 6 years of absence had transformed his little boy into this suspicious young man, hardened by life on the streets. How had this happened? How had his son ended up with his former? housekeeper in a landfill, and why did Matthew call her mum? When they reached the car, the driver and assistant were visibly shocked, but a look from Roderick was enough to prevent any questions. The Portland hospital now. During the journey, Matthew held Louisa's hand, murmuring words of encouragement. Roderick watched the scene, feeling like a stranger to his own son. An abyss of 6 years separated them, an abyss filled with lies he still didn't understand. "She's the only person who truly loved me," Matthew suddenly said, as if reading his father's thoughts. "She almost left several times because of me, but she never abandoned me." The words hit Roderick like a punch. What had happened for his son to believe he wasn't loved in his own home? "Matthew, I never stopped looking for you," he said, his voice choked. "Not a single day in the last 6 years." The boy looked at him with eyes that seemed much older than his 11 years. "Then why did you never find us?" "We were there all the time." It was a question for which Roderick had no answer. As the car crossed the city towards the hospital, he knew only one thing. His life would never be the same. The truth, whatever it was, awaited to be revealed, and he feared it would be even more painful than the 6 years of absence that had just ended. 12 years earlier, the Alistair mansion in Kensington glowed illuminated for a charity dinner. Christine, in her designer dress and glittering jewellery, circulated among the guests as the perfect hostess. Roderick watched his wife from a distance, admiring her social skills, while trying to ignore the lump in his throat that had accompanied him for months. Another failed in vitro fertilization attempt. The doctor had been clear that afternoon. Christine's chances of getting pregnant naturally were practically nil, and artificial techniques weren't working. The couple had already invested a fortune in treatments with the best specialists in the UK and abroad. "Sir, do you need anything else?" Louisa's soft voice pulled him from his thoughts. The young housekeeper, recently hired, held a tray with champagne glasses. "No thank you, Louisa." He noticed that the girl looked tired, despite her impeccable uniform and professional posture. At 18, Louisa was the youngest of the domestic staff, hired as a general helper after a strong recommendation from the former governess. What Roderick didn't know that night was that Louisa carried a secret. A secret that, ironically, was the solution to the problem that tormented him. The young woman was almost 4 months pregnant, the result of a relationship with a university student who disappeared upon learning of the pregnancy. She worked hard to hide her belly under her loose uniform, fearing losing the job that supported not only her, but also her bedridden father after a stroke. It was Christine who discovered it. 2 weeks later, finding Louisa feeling unwell in the staff bathroom. "You're pregnant." It wasn't a question, but a statement. Louisa, pale and frightened, simply nodded. Instead of firing her as the young woman feared, Christine did something surprising. She invited her for a private conversation in the mansion's office. There, amidst tears, she revealed her own struggle to have a child. And then she presented a proposal that would forever change everyone's lives. "I want to adopt your baby," Christine said directly. "Legally, with all rights. You can continue working here, watch the child grow up, but as an employee, not as a mother. In return, I will ensure that you and your father have financial stability." Desperate at the prospect of raising a child alone while caring for her sick father, without formal education or prospects, Louisa accepted the proposal after days of painful reflection. The agreement was sealed in a discreet law office. The child would be legally the Alistair's son, with documentation suggesting a normal birth. Christine's plan was meticulous. She began wearing loose clothing, announced to friends and family that she had finally become pregnant, a miracle after so many attempts, and gradually withdrew from her social circle. In the last few months, she traveled to a supposed rest home in the Cotswolds, where she would await the birth. Roderick was radiant with the miraculous pregnancy, completely oblivious to the agreement made by his wife. Christine justified the distance as a medical recommendation due to a high-risk pregnancy. Only one thing she didn't have the courage to tell her husband, that the adoption would come from her own housekeeper. Instead, she invented that the baby would come from an unknown mother through a closed and confidential adoption. When the baby was born, in a discreet clinic in the Kent countryside, Christine was present. Louisa handed the boy into her employer's arms and cried silently as she signed the final documents relinquishing motherhood. It was a rainy Sunday in April, His name will be Matthew, Christine said, cradling the newborn. Matthew Alistair. 2 weeks later, Louisa returned to work at the mansion. Her body still bore the marks of recent childbirth. Her breast still produced milk that she painfully dried with compresses, while watching her baby being cared for by a professional nanny hired especially for the Alistairs' miracle son. Roderick returned from his business trip to meet his son. His heart overflowed as he held that tiny being he believed to be the fruit of his love with Christine. "He's perfect," he whispered, enraptured. Our miracle. Years passed. Matthew grew into a healthy and intelligent boy. At 3, he already showed an insatiable curiosity and an unusual sensitivity for his age. Christine was a dedicated mother in her own way, ensuring the best schools, clothes, educational toys, and all kinds of lessons. Roderick, despite his overloaded schedule, reserved weekends for his son, teaching him to swim, ride a bike, play football. And Louisa? She remained in the mansion, silently watching her biological son grow up, calling another woman mum. The pain never diminished, but she found subtle ways to be present in Matthew's life. It was she who prepared the special hot chocolate on cold mornings, exactly as the boy liked it. It was she who knew his favorite fruit, and always left a cut portion near his coloring books. Small gestures that went unnoticed by the employers, but that created an inexplicable connection between her and the boy. Matthew, in turn, developed a special affection for Louisa. For a child, it was simply natural to be attracted to the person who treated him with genuine love, without demands or expectations. Christine began to notice this closeness when her son turned 4. "Louisa, Louisa, look what I drew at school," Matthew would shout upon arriving home, running straight to the utility room instead of showing it to his mother first. Or, "Mummy, can I show Louisa my new room? She hasn't seen it since the renovation." These small signs began to deeply disturb Christine. The fear of losing her son to his true biological mother grew silently, fueled by every smile Matthew directed at the housekeeper, every spontaneous hug he gave her, every time he asked Louisa to tell him a story before bed. It was when Matthew was 5 years old that fate decided to intervene. Through acute appendicitis that required emergency surgery. "We'll need to do a transfusion," the doctor informed them. "We'll test the parents' compatibility." It was at that moment that the house of cards began to crumble. Tests revealed that Roderick had an incompatible blood type with his son, information that could easily raise questions about paternity. Christine panicked. "There must be some error in the tests," she insisted with the doctor when they were alone. "My husband cannot know this. It must be a laboratory error." The doctor, perceiving the woman's genuine distress, agreed to keep the information confidential and seek other compatible donors. The surgery was successful. Matthew recovered quickly, but the incident raised an alarm in Christine. The secret she had kept for 5 years could come to light at any moment. Fear is a dangerous counselor, and Christine began to take measures to distance Louisa from Matthew. First, there were small changes in the work schedule, ensuring that the housekeeper was busy in other areas of the house when the boy arrived from school. Then complaints about the quality of service, constant criticism, small humiliations disguised as professional guidance. Louisa noticed the change but endured it in silence. The agreement she had made years earlier put her in a vulnerable position, and she needed the job to support her father, whose health remained fragile. Furthermore, leaving the house would mean losing contact with Matthew, something her mother's heart could not bear. The tension grew for months until a small incident served as the trigger. Matthew had made a drawing at school, a representation of his family. On the paper there were 4 figures, him, his father, his mother, and Louisa, drawn the same size as Christine and with a red heart next to her. When Christine saw the drawing, something broke inside her. The fear of losing her son, combined with the guilt of the secret kept from Roderick, transformed into destructive paranoia. That same night, while her husband worked late, she called Louisa for a conversation. "You're trying to steal my son," she accused, throwing the drawing on the table. "I see what you're doing," telling him, "aren't you? Hinting things about being his real mother." "No, madam, I would never do that," Louisa replied, shocked. "I've respected our agreement all these years. I've never said a word." "Liar!" Christine was beside herself. "I see how he runs to you, how he prefers your food, your stories. You're poisoning my son against me." The discussion escalated quickly. In a moment of desperation, seeing herself cornered by the unjust accusations, Louisa made the mistake that would change the course of everything. "He feels true love, madam. Children perceive when they are truly loved, not out of obligation or appearance." Those words were the spark in the powder keg. Christine, furious, formulated a plan that would ensure Louisa's definitive removal. When Roderick arrived home, he found his wife in tears, seemingly devastated. "What happened?" he asked, alarmed. Between studied sobs, Christine told a fabricated story. Louisa had confessed to being in love with him, that she had been trying to seduce him for months. She said the housekeeper threatened to invent stories to break up the family if she was rejected. "She said Matthew isn't your son," Christine cried. "She's making up absurd lies, saying she's his real mother, that we have a secret agreement. It's madness, Roderick. She's obsessive, dangerous. We need to protect our son." Roderick was stunned by the revelation. Part of him doubted. Louisa had always been an exemplary employee, discreet, respectful. But why would Christine invent something so serious? His love for his son and trust in his wife spoke louder. The next morning he called Louisa to his office. The young woman entered, already sensing what was coming, her eyes red from a sleepless night. "Louisa, you've worked in our house for 5 years, and I've always respected you as a professional," he began formally. "But I cannot tolerate what happened. Your behavior crossed all acceptable boundaries. Sir, I don't know what Mrs. Christine told you, but I swear that—" "I don't want to hear any more lies," he interrupted firmly. "You are dismissed immediately. You will receive all your legal rights, but I want you to leave this house today without contact with any family member, especially my son." Louisa felt her world collapse. 5 years of silently caring for her son, 5 years of daily emotional sacrifice, ended like this. With false accusations she couldn't contest without revealing a secret she had promised to keep. "Please, sir, at least let me say goodbye to Matthew," she pleaded, tears streaming freely. "Impossible. He's already left for school and you won't be here when he returns." At that moment, something changed in Louisa's eyes. The timid and submissive young woman gave way to a woman wounded in her deepest essence. "One day the truth will come out, Mr. Alistair," she said with surprising dignity. "And when that day comes, I hope you can forgive yourself for what you are doing today." She left the mansion with only the bag she carried daily and a bag of basic belongings. She received no references. Christine ensured that no other high society family would hire her, discreetly spreading among her friends that the young woman was problematic and obsessed with the boss. Without a job, without references, and with a sick father to support, Louisa quickly saw her life unravel. She lost her small rented flat when her savings ran out. Her father, without adequate medication, worsened and had to be admitted to a public hospital. Louisa slept in the hospital corridor, using the bathrooms to keep herself minimally presentable while looking for jobs during the day. When her father passed away 3 months later, she had nothing left to lose, except the hope of one day finding her son again. Meanwhile, at the Alistair mansion, Roderick couldn't forget Louisa's last words. A persistent unease led him to investigate discreetly. Matthew had asked about the housekeeper several times, clearly missing her, which increased his suspicions. In secret, he hired a laboratory to perform a DNA test, comparing his genetic material with that of his son. When the result arrived, confirming that there was no biological compatibility, his world collapsed. He confronted Christine with a cold fury she had never witnessed. "Matthew is not my biological son," he stated, throwing the envelope with the results on the table. "I want the truth, Christine. All of it." Cornered, Christine partially confessed yes, Matthew was adopted. No, she did not become pregnant naturally, as she had said. She explained about the secret adoption, the circumstances, the desperate desire to give him the child he so wanted. But she maintained the crucial lie. She did not reveal that Louisa was the biological mother. Instead, she maintained the story that the housekeeper had discovered about the adoption by chance and was using the information to blackmail the family, threatening to tell Matthew. She was obsessed with the boy, Roderick. She wanted to take him from us using that information. That's why I had to ask you to fire her. Roderick felt doubly betrayed, by the lie about his son's origin and by the secret kept for so many years. But still, he loved Matthew unconditionally. The bond built over 5 years was real, regardless of DNA. "Why didn't you tell me about the adoption from the beginning?" he asked, his voice full of hurt. "I was afraid of losing you," Christine cried, "that you would leave me for not being able to give you a biological child." And then it became increasingly difficult to tell the truth. That night marked the beginning of the end of the Alistair marriage. Roderick began sleeping in the guest room, immersing himself in work to process the betrayal. Christine, realizing she was losing her husband, became obsessively protective of Matthew, as if he too could disappear at any moment. The boy, sensitive as ever, perceived the changes in the family dynamic. His father, once present on weekends, now seemed distant, observing him with a look that mixed love and sadness. His mother, once balanced despite the demands for excellence, became suffocating, controlling, questioning every movement, every friendship, every interest. And it was in this environment of silent tension that Matthew, at 6 years old, found the letter that would change his life. A letter written by Louisa before leaving the mansion, hidden by one of the cooks who felt compassion for the unjustly wronged young woman. A letter that revealed, in simple and loving terms, that she was his true mother. The letter was hidden inside an old storybook that Matthew rarely picked up, The Little Prince. Mrs. Eleanor, the oldest cook in the house, had chosen that hiding place carefully. She knew that eventually the boy would find it, but only when he was a little older and could better understand its content. It was on a Saturday afternoon, while Christine was attending a charity tea and Roderick was locked in his office, that Matthew, bored and lonely, decided to explore the small library in his room. As he leafed through the book, an envelope fell to the floor. Inside was a carefully folded sheet of paper. In her simple but elegant handwriting, "To Matthew, my little prince," it read at the top of the page. The boy sat on the edge of the bed and began to read, moving his lips as he followed the words. As he progressed through the reading, his eyes widened, processing information that his childish brain could barely fully comprehend. "Dear Matthew, if you are reading this letter, it means I am no longer working in your house. Perhaps they told you I left because I wanted to, but the truth is I would never choose to leave you. There is a secret I have carried since before you were born, a secret that your mother Christine and I share, but that your father does not know. You were not born from Christine's belly. You were born from my belly. You are my blood son. When I found out I was expecting you, I was very young and unable to raise a child alone. Your parents couldn't have children, and so we made an agreement. They would adopt you, give you everything I couldn't offer, and I would stay close, watching you grow. Even if you didn't know who I really was. Every hot chocolate I prepared for you, every story I read before bed, every plaster I put on your scrapes in each of those moments. My mother's heart was present, even if in silence. I am not writing this to confuse you or to make you love your parents less. Christine and Roderick are your real parents, for they are the ones who raised you all these years. Love is stronger than blood. But you deserve to know the truth when you are old enough to understand. If one day you want to find me, ask for Louisa Ferris. Wherever I am, I will always keep you in my heart. With all my love, Louisa." Matthew read the letter 3 times, trying to understand what those words truly meant. His 6-year-old mind processed fragments of memories, Louisa's special affection, the way she always knew exactly what he liked, the sad glances he sometimes caught her giving him. He also remembered the recent changes at home, his distant father, his more controlling mother, the hushed discussions that ceased when he entered the room. Everything began to make sense, even for his age-limited understanding. He carefully put the letter under his mattress and went down to the kitchen, where Mrs. Eleanor was preparing dinner. "Mrs. Eleanor," he called hesitantly, "do you know where Louisa is living now?" The cook froze for a moment, her face revealing surprise followed by understanding. "You found the letter, didn't you, boy?" Matthew nodded, his eyes wide and questioning. Mrs. Eleanor dried her hands on her apron and sat at the kitchen table, gesturing for Matthew to do the same. "Look, my child, I don't know exactly where she is. After she left here, the poor thing went through a lot of problems. Her father was ill, you know, and without a job. Is she my real mum?" he asked directly, with that disconcerting sincerity typical of children. The cook sighed deeply. "That's a complicated story, Matthew. These are adult matters that one day you will understand better. But I can tell you that Louisa loves you very much, always has, since before you were born. Why did she leave then? Sometimes in life people are separated, even when they love each other. It wasn't her choice. Matthew absorbed every word, his serious little face showing an understanding beyond his years. I'm going to look for her, he declared with surprising determination. And when I find her, I'm going to bring her back. Mrs. Eleanor smiled sadly, stroking the boy's hair. Life isn't that simple, my dear. But keep that love in your heart. One day, who knows? In the following days, Matthew became observant, collecting snippets of information from adult conversations. He discovered that his father was not his blood father by overhearing a heated argument between Roderick and Christine. He realized that his mother was hiding something important by the way she avoided certain questions. And he noticed, with the keen perception of children, that something fundamental had broken in his family. A week after finding the letter, during a particularly tense dinner, Matthew gathered the courage to ask the question that burned in his chest. Mummy, why did Louisa leave? Was she my real mum? The silence that followed was deafening. Christine dropped her fork, which clinked against the porcelain plate. Roderick stiffened, his eyes darting from his wife's panicked expression to his son's innocent face. Who told you that? Christine finally managed to ask, her voice trembling. I found a letter. She said I was born from her belly. Christine paled while Roderick tried to process the information. In all the scenarios he imagined after discovering the adoption, he never considered that Louisa could be the boy's biological mother. That's a lie, Christine replied quickly, her voice sharp. Louisa had problems. She made up stories. That's why she had to leave here. So it's not true, Matthew insisted, confused. She's not my mum. It was at that moment that Roderick intervened, unable to bear any more lies. Matthew, go to your room, please. I need to talk to your mother. But Daddy... Now, son, he said firmly but without aggression. We'll talk about this later, I promise. Reluctantly, Matthew obeyed, but stopped in the corridor, hidden behind the slightly ajar dining room door. What he heard next would mark his life forever. Louisa is Matthew's biological mother. Roderick's voice was low, controlled, but charged with suppressed fury. All this time, the woman who worked in our house, whom you accused of trying to seduce me, was our son's real mother. Roderick, I can explain, Christine sobbed. When I found out she was pregnant, I saw an opportunity. She was young, she couldn't afford it, her father was ill. I offered an agreement that would benefit everyone. You wanted a child so much I couldn't give you that naturally. So you built our family on lies, he concluded, his disappointment evident. And when the truth threatened to come out, you destroyed her life, separated her from her own son with false accusations. I was protecting our family, Christine screamed. She was becoming obsessive with Matthew. He was getting too attached to her. It was only a matter of time before she tried to take him away or told the truth. The truth you should have told me from the beginning, Roderick retorted. Christ, Christine. She lived 5 years seeing her own son call someone else mum under the same roof. Can you imagine what that must have cost her? In the gloom of the corridor, Matthew absorbed every word, every revelation. His small world was collapsing, but paradoxically, some things finally made sense. Louisa's special affection. The way she looked at him when she thought no one was watching. The stories about the prince who was adopted by a royal family that she repeatedly told him before bed. The argument continued for hours. Matthew eventually retreated to his room, where he lay staring at the ceiling, his head full of unanswered questions. One certainty, however, began to form in his childish mind. He needed to find Louisa, his other mother, the mother who carried him in her belly and who was now alone somewhere. In the days that followed, the tension in the Alistair house was palpable. Roderick barely spoke to Christine. Meals were silent and uncomfortable. Matthew observed everything with watchful eyes, absorbing the impact of the family crisis while formulating his own plan. During a physical education class at school, he asked an older classmate how someone could find a missing person. My cousin ran away once, the boy replied with the authority of his 9 years. The police looked for him in hospitals, shelters, things like that. Places where homeless people go. The information was stored. In computer class, when he should have been practicing typing, Matthew secretly searched, where do homeless people live in London? The results showed images of people sleeping under flyovers, in squares, makeshift shelters. One photo in particular caught his attention: a group of scavengers near Waterloo, close to the central region. Each new piece of information fueled his determination. He began to save money: his lunch coins, some notes he received from his grandparents, even small amounts he took from the tip jar of the housekeeper who replaced Louisa. In a small school backpack, he hid a change of clothes, Louisa's letter, the accumulated money, and a photo of her he managed to snatch from an old family album. On Friday, after a particularly tense week, when Christine finally agreed to go out for a social event and Roderick was on a business trip, Matthew saw his opportunity. The new nanny, hired after Louisa left, was distracted watching a soap opera in the TV room. He said he was going to play in his room and silently slipped out the side door of the kitchen, normally used for deliveries. London, with its almost 12 million inhabitants, is no place for a 6-year-old child to walk alone. But Matthew, driven by a mixture of innocence and determination, didn't think about the dangers. In his mind, finding Louisa was simply a matter of looking in the right places. He took a bus he knew passed near the centre. He had already made the journey with the school on an excursion. He sat quietly, trying to appear invisible, a boy too well dressed to be unaccompanied on that route that cut across the city. When he got off at Trafalgar Square, the sun was beginning to set. The reality of the big city, with its nocturnal characters emerging in the shadows, finally frightened him. He clutched his backpack to his chest and began to walk aimlessly, his eyes searching every female face for Louisa's familiar features. It was hours of erratic walking, avoiding contact with adults who might question what a child was doing alone at that hour. When hunger gnawed, he bought a sandwich at a diner where the attendant gave him suspicious looks. "Where's your mum, boy?" "She's waiting for me out there," he lied, vaguely pointing to the street. The night wore on. Exhaustion and fear began to overcome his initial determination. He sat on a bench in the square, watching homeless people settle down to sleep, a world so distant from his privileged reality. The lights of the big city, once fascinating, now seemed threatening. It was then that a group of recycling pickers passed by, pushing loaded trolleys. Among them, a thin woman with a scarf covering her hair. Matthew felt his heart race. There was something familiar about her, in her posture, in her way of walking. "Louisa?" he called timidly, but she was already far away. Driven by new hope, he followed the group from a distance. They entered a narrow street, then a vacant lot where several makeshift tents formed a small community. Matthew hesitated at the entrance, intimidated, but kept walking, determined to find the woman he had glimpsed. He didn't notice when a dog began to bark furiously at him, startled by the intruder. The noise attracted everyone's attention, including the woman he was following. "Quiet, Smokey," she ordered the dog, turning around. It was then that their eyes met. It wasn't Louisa. Up close, the woman bore no resemblance to his former housekeeper. Disappointment hit Matthew like a punch, and he finally broke down, exhausted and frightened, tears streaming freely. "What's wrong, boy? Are you lost?" The woman approached, her voice surprisingly gentle. Between sobs, Matthew tried to explain that he was looking for Louisa, his real mother, showing the crumpled photo he carried. The woman examined the image carefully. "I don't know her, but you shouldn't be here alone. This place is dangerous for a child." Elsewhere in the city, panic had set in at the Alistair mansion. The nanny, upon realizing Matthew's disappearance, desperately called Christine, who abandoned the event and rushed home. The police were called. Roderick, informed during his trip, took the first flight back to London. Searches began immediately. Matthew's photo was distributed, police teams mobilized, hospitals and shelters contacted. Christine, hysterical, alternated between accusing the nanny of negligence and succumbing to despair. Deep down, however, a terrible premonition consumed her. What if her son had run away to look for Louisa? Meanwhile, Matthew had been taken to a temporary shelter for vulnerable children. He refused to give his full name or home address, determined to continue his search for Louisa. He only said that he was looking for his mother, that he had been separated from her. It was in this shelter the next morning that fate finally conspired in his favor. A young social worker arrived for the morning shift. She volunteered there twice a week, while trying to rebuild her life after months of hardship. Her name was Louisa Ferris. When she entered the room where the children were having breakfast, her eyes immediately recognized the small visitor. The shock paralyzed her momentarily. Matthew, her biological son, was there, less than 3 meters away. How was it possible? "Louisa!" The childish voice broke the silence. Matthew stared at her with wide eyes, as if seeing a ghost. "Matthew?" "What? How are you here?" she asked, approaching cautiously, fearing it was a hallucination caused by months of suffering. The boy ran towards her, hugging her tightly. "I knew I'd find you. I read your letter. I know you're my real mum." Louisa looked around, aware of the curious glances. She took Matthew to a private room, where he told the whole story. The letter found, the argument between his parents, his escape to look for her. "They're looking for you, Matthew," she said, torn between the joy of reunion and the weight of responsibility. "Your parents must be desperate." "You're my mum too," the boy insisted. "I want to live with you now." Louisa felt her heart break. She had dreamed so many times of this moment, but never like this. Never at the cost of the suffering of a 6-year-old boy who barely understood the complexities of the situation. "I need to take you back, Matthew. It's the right thing to do." The disappointment on her son's face almost made her back down, but she knew she had no choice. After informing the shelter coordination that she knew the boy, she obtained authorization to take him personally to the nearest police station, where his disappearance case would certainly be registered. On the way, Matthew held her hand tightly, as if afraid she would disappear again. Louisa explained to him in simple words the complexity of the situation. "Christine and Roderick are your parents, Matthew. They raised you with love all these years, but they lied. And they made you leave. Things between adults are complicated sometimes. There aren't always heroes and villains like in stories. But you need to know that everyone loves you very much, each in their own way." When they arrived at the Allister mansion, Louisa chose to go directly to the house instead of the police station. Wanting to avoid more bureaucracy and exposure for the boy, they were greeted by a distraught Christine, deep circles under her always impeccable eyes. Roderick was in the living room on the phone with the police. "Matthew!" Christine cried, running towards her son. She stopped abruptly when she saw who was accompanying him. "You!" The tension in the air was palpable. Roderick hung up the phone and approached slowly, his face a mask of conflicting emotions: relief at seeing his son, shock at recognizing Louisa, guilt for the years of injustice. "I found him in a shelter in the center," Louisa explained, keeping her distance. "He was looking for me." "You kidnapped him," Christine accused, clutching Matthew protectively. "You manipulated a 6-year-old boy to run away from home." "No, Mum," Matthew protested, surprising everyone with his vehemence. "I ran away by myself to find Louisa. I read her letter. I know she's my real mum." Christine paled. Roderick stepped forward, placing himself between his ex-wife and Louisa, who remained dignified at the entrance. "Thank you for bringing him back, Louisa," he said sincerely. "We were desperate." "She can't stay here," Christine hissed. "She's caused enough damage to our family." "I just came to bring your son back," Louisa replied, her voice trembling but firm. "Now I'm leaving." "No!" Matthew cried, breaking free from his mother's arms and running to Louisa. "Don't leave again, please." The impasse was painful. Louisa knelt to be at the boy's height, holding his small hands. "Matthew, your place is here with your parents. They love you very much. I love you too, and I always will, but—" Christine advanced, pulling Matthew away. "Enough! Get out of my house now, or I'll call the police." "Christine, please," Roderick tried to intervene. "We need to talk like adults for Matthew's sake." "Talk? With the woman who put lies in my son's head to turn him against me? Who made him run away from home, causing us the worst despair of our lives? She should be arrested for kidnapping." It was at that moment that Matthew, frightened by the escalating tension, began to cry desperately. "Stop fighting! I don't want anyone to be arrested." The boy's crying silenced the adults. Louisa, feeling that her presence only worsened the situation, took a step back. "I need to go now. Matthew is safe with you. That's what matters." She cast one last look at her son, a look filled with love, regret, and resignation, before turning to leave. The devastated expression on Matthew's little face would be etched in her memory forever. "I'll find you again," he promised between sobs. "One day." Louisa left the mansion with a broken heart, but aware that she had done the right thing by returning the boy. What she didn't know, as she walked down the tree-lined street of Kensington, was that Christine was already formulating a plan to ensure this reunion never happened again. That night, while Matthew finally slept, exhausted by the emotional turmoil, Christine confronted Roderick in the office. "We need to move cities immediately, start over somewhere else, away from her." "This is madness, Christine. We can't just uproot Matthew from everything he knows. It's the only way to protect him," she insisted. "You saw how confused, how torn he is. That woman will keep trying, Roderick. She'll never give up trying to take him away." "Louisa brought our son back voluntarily," Roderick argued. "She could have disappeared with him if she wanted to. This time, and next time, when Matthew is older, more independent, she'll poison him against us, make him hate us." The argument stretched into the early hours of the morning. While the adults decided his fate, Matthew, who was pretending to sleep, silently got up and went to the window. He looked at the stars, thinking of Louisa. How different she looked. Thinner, sadder in worn clothes. Something in him, even with his 6-year-old's limited perception, knew that she needed him as much as he needed her. In her room, Christine cried, hugging her pillow. Her obsessive love for her adopted son and the fear of losing him had transformed into a destructive force that consumed her from within. She was willing to do anything to keep Matthew, lie, manipulate, destroy Louisa's life, and if that meant creating new lies, so be it. Roderick in the office drank whiskey as he contemplated how his perfect life had disintegrated. He loved Matthew unconditionally, despite the absence of biological ties. But the guilt of having believed Christine's lies, of having unjustly fired Louisa, of having been an involuntary accomplice in the separation between mother and son, all of this gnawed at him. He felt he needed to fix things somehow, but how? On the outskirts of the city, in a small rented room, Louisa also couldn't sleep. The brief reunion with Matthew had rekindled hopes she thought were dead. But it also left her with a bitter certainty. Christine would never allow her to be part of her son's life, unless she could legally prove she was the biological mother. That the adoption process had been irregular, manipulated, based on coercion of a vulnerable young woman. With this fixed idea in mind, Louisa decided she would fight, no longer for daily survival, but for her right to be a mother. She ignored, however, how far Christine was willing to go to stop her. The next morning, Roderick found Matthew awake earlier than usual, sitting on the edge of the bed with a distant look. The businessman sat next to his son, searching for words for a conversation he never imagined needing to have with a 6-year-old child. "How are you feeling, son?" Matthew took a while to answer, his eyes fixed on his own hands. "Why did you never tell me about Louisa being my real mum?" Roderick sighed deeply. How to explain adult complexities to a child? "The truth, Matthew, is that I didn't know until recently either. Your mother, Christine, thought it best to keep that secret." "Why?" "She was afraid that if you knew, you might want to leave with Louisa." Matthew absorbed the information in silence, processing it in his own way. "And you? You're not my real dad either." The question hit Roderick like an arrow. "Matthew, listen carefully. Being a father or mother isn't just about who gave the blood or carried in the belly. It's about who loves, protects, teaches, is present. I am your father in every way that matters. From the first day I held you in my arms, you are my son. Nothing will change that. Then why can't Louisa stay here too? If she's my tummy mum, she could also live with us." Children's simple, direct logic often exposes the contradictions that adults build. Roderick had no easy answer to that question. "It's complicated, son. Adults sometimes create situations that are difficult to resolve. But I want you to know one thing. I will try to fix the mistakes we made. I promise." Matthew nodded, not entirely satisfied, but comforted by his father's honesty. Louisa looked so thin and sad. "I noticed that too," Roderick replied, feeling the weight of guilt. "We'll help her, won't we?" Before they could continue their conversation, Christine appeared at the door, her eyes swollen from crying and a determined expression on her face. "Breakfast is ready, Matthew. Come on, you need to eat properly." Roderick noticed the travel case in the hallway. "Christine, what's that?" "We're going to our country house in the Cotswolds," she announced, avoiding looking directly at her ex-husband. "Matthew needs peace after all this trauma." "We didn't talk about this," Roderick protested, standing up. "You can't just take him without us discussing it." "That's exactly what I'm going to do," Christine retorted, her voice cold. "I'm still his mother. Legally, I have as much right as you, and right now I need to protect him from bad influences." "Louisa isn't a bad influence," Matthew exclaimed, surprising the adults with his vehemence. "She found me and brought me back home." "She put ideas in your head that made you run away in the first place," Christine countered, kneeling to be at her son's height. "Darling, you're too little to understand, but trust me, we need some time away from here, just us two. It'll be like a holiday. Remember how much we love the Cotswolds." As Matthew was led to breakfast, Roderick pulled Christine into the hallway. "I won't let you take him like this. We need to resolve this together as adults for his sake." "Resolve what, Roderick?" "That the housekeeper we fired years ago has resurfaced to claim our son. That Matthew is now confused, calling another woman mum. There's nothing to resolve. We're leaving today, and when we come back, that woman will have disappeared from our lives again." "And what if she doesn't disappear?" Roderick questioned. "What if she decides to fight legally?" "Christine, you lied to me about the adoption. You lied about Matthew's origin. What if Louisa proves she was coerced into giving up her son, that the process didn't follow legal procedures?" Christine's face paled. "Are you on her side now?" "I'm on Matthew's side. I always have been. And if you continue with this obsessive behavior, you'll end up losing him completely." The discussion was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Roderick went to answer it, while Christine hurried Matthew to finish breakfast. At the door, a surprised Louisa accompanied by an older, formally dressed woman. "Good morning, Mr. Alistair," Louisa said, visibly nervous but determined. "This is Dr. Teresa Miller, a family law specialist. We've come to talk about Matthew." Roderick looked from one to the other, surprised by the speed of events. "Please come in." Christine, who was coming down the stairs holding Matthew's hand, froze upon seeing the visitors. "You!" The tension in the air was palpable. Roderick disconnected the phone and slowly approached, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Relief at seeing his son, shock at recognizing Louisa, guilt for the years of injustice. "Mrs. Alistair," the lawyer stepped forward, professional and calm. "We are here to propose a civilized conversation, with the child's best interests in mind. It would be productive if we could all sit down as reasonable adults." "I have nothing to discuss with you," Christine replied, pulling Matthew behind her, "and I will not allow you to disturb my son again." "Mom, I want to see Louisa," Matthew protested, trying to break free. "Let her stay for a bit." Christine's expression twisted into a mask of anger and pain. "See what you've done?" she accused, looking at Louisa. "How you're turning my own son against me." "Christine, calm down," Roderick intervened. "Let's hear what they have to say." "I don't have to listen to anything. I have all the legal documents. Matthew is my son." The tension grew with each second. Matthew looked from one adult to another, frightened by the conflict. Louisa remained silent, visibly uncomfortable at causing such a disturbance, but equally determined. "Mrs. Alistair," the lawyer tried again, maintaining a professional tone, "my client is not here to cause problems. She simply wants to establish some form of agreement that allows regular contact with her biological son. No one is questioning your rights as an adoptive mother." "Not yet," Christine murmured with a bitter laugh. "But it's only a matter of time, isn't it? First visits, then shared custody, and then she'll take him away forever." "I don't want to take Matthew from you," Louisa finally spoke. "I just want to be able to see him, to be part of his life in some way. So I spent 5 years in this house, watching him grow from a distance. Then I was unjustly accused and expelled. All I ask is a chance to maintain contact with my son." "Your son?" Christine advanced a few steps, threateningly. "You carried him for 9 months, yes. But who was by his side during fevers, nightmares, first steps, first words? Who raised him, fed him, clothed him for 6 years? Me, I am his mother." Roderick noticed Matthew beginning to cry silently, frightened by the intensity of the argument. He knelt to be at the boy's height. "Matthew, how about you go up to your room for a little while we talk? I promise I'll explain everything afterwards. I don't want you to fight because of me," the boy sobbed. "I just wanted to know Louisa better." I didn't want anyone to be angry. Louisa felt her heart ache. It's all right, Matthew. No one is angry with you. These are adult matters that we will resolve. The lawyer intervened again. Perhaps it is better for the boy not to witness this conversation. We can speak more freely. Christine, realizing she was losing control, took a deep breath and adopted a calmer posture. Matthew, why don't you go to your room and get that new book we bought? We can read it together later. Reluctantly, the boy went upstairs, casting glances back, especially at Louisa, as if fearing she would disappear again. When only the adults remained, the lawyer got straight to the point. I have enough information to legally challenge Matthew's adoption process. Mrs. Ferris was underage when she signed the documents relinquishing motherhood, was in a vulnerable situation due to her father's illness and economic dependence, and alleges she was pressured by Mrs. Alistair. Christine paled. Are you threatening me? I am merely presenting facts. However, my client does not wish for a long and draining legal process, which would be traumatic for everyone, especially for Matthew. She proposes an out-of-court settlement, regular visits with a gradual increase in frequency as the boy gets used to it. No interference in his education or the adoptive parents' decisions, just the opportunity to maintain a connection with her biological son. Roderick considered the proposal, finding it reasonable. It seems like a good start. We could— Absolutely not, Christine interrupted. I will not allow this woman to further confuse my son. She only came back into our lives because Matthew ran away. Before that, where was she? Why didn't she try to make contact all these years? Louisa felt her indignation grow. You know very well why I didn't try to make contact. I was fired with false accusations, without references, prevented from working in any respectable family home. I lost everything, my job, my dignity, and the chance to watch my son grow up. When my father worsened and we could no longer pay the rent, we were evicted. I tried to send letters to Matthew, but they all came back. I tried to call, but they never got past the doorman. The revelation surprised Roderick. You tried to make contact? I never knew that. Of course I tried. Do you think I would abandon my son voluntarily? But your wife ensured I would never approach again. She threatened me with a harassment lawsuit if I tried. All eyes turned to Christine, who maintained her position, unyielding. I did what any mother would do to protect her child, and I would do it all again. The problem, Mrs. Alistair, the lawyer intervened, is that your actions can be interpreted as obstruction of family ties. A judge could view your deliberate attempts to prevent any contact between Matthew and his biological mother very unfavorably, especially when she demonstrated legitimate intentions. A heavy silence fell over the room. Christine seemed to calculate her options, while Roderick tried to process the new revelations. I thought a lot before coming back, Louisa continued, softening her tone. I know it's a difficult situation for everyone, but yesterday, when Matthew recognized me immediately, when I saw the love in his eyes, I realized I had to fight, not to take him from you, but to have the right to be part of his life. He deserves to know his origins, his complete story. Christine let out a bitter laugh. How touching. Now that he's 6, well-behaved, healthy, after we've done all the hard work, you show up wanting to reap the rewards. Christine, enough, Roderick intervened, exasperated. You're twisting everything. Louisa didn't abandon Matthew. We took him from her. Or rather, you took him with lies and manipulation. Are you on her side now? I'm trying to see the situation objectively. We have a responsibility here. The lawyer seized the opportunity. Mr. Alistair, would it be possible to speak with you separately? Perhaps we can reach an agreement more easily. Before Roderick could answer, Christine interrupted. There will be no agreement. Not without my presence. Legally, I have as much right over Matthew as you, Roderick. And if you insist on this, I will fight for exclusive custody. The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Roderick knew Christine was capable of carrying it out. She had money, influence, and unwavering determination when it came to Matthew. Perhaps we need some time to consider the options, the lawyer suggested. Sensing that the situation was becoming uncontrollable, we can schedule another meeting in a few days when tempers are calmer. There will be no other meeting, Christine declared, walking to the front door and opening it as an unequivocal invitation for them to leave. And I suggest you think very carefully before pursuing any legal action. I have the resources to drag this out for years, and the only one who will suffer will be Matthew. Louisa exchanged glances with her lawyer, who subtly nodded, indicating it was best to retreat for now. She headed for the door, but before leaving, she turned one last time. I just want you to know, Mrs. Alistair, that I never intended to harm your family. I signed those papers years ago, because I believed I was giving my son the best possible life. And even after everything that happened, I still believe you love him. I just hope that love doesn't turn into a prison for him. When the door closed behind the visitors, Christine turned to Roderick, her face a mask of cold determination. Pack your things. You have an hour to leave this house. What? Christine, you can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. You are clearly on her side, so you are no longer welcome here. I will file for divorce and exclusive custody of Matthew today. This is madness. You can't just stop me from seeing my son. I can and I will if you continue to defend that woman. Matthew and I are leaving for the Cotswolds today, and we won't return until this situation is resolved. Roderick felt despair grow. Christine, think about what you're doing. You're letting fear and obsession control your actions. This will only harm Matthew in the end. What will harm him is growing up confused about who his real family is. That woman should never have come back, and I will make sure she disappears from our lives forever. The threatening tone in Christine's words alarmed Roderick. What are you planning to do? Before she could answer, a noise on the stairs caught both their attention. Matthew was sitting on the top step, hugging his favorite teddy bear, clearly having overheard part of the conversation. I don't want Daddy to leave, he said, his voice choked. And I don't want Louisa to disappear. Christine quickly went up the steps, kneeling beside her son. Matthew, darling, sometimes adults need time apart to resolve their problems. We'll go to our little house in the country. Just you and me, like before. It'll be fun. What about Daddy? And Louisa? Your father has a lot of work here in the city. And as for Louisa, she has her own life to take care of. You are my son, Matthew. My only son. I need you to understand that. The boy looked at his father, who remained at the foot of the stairs, helpless before Christine's determination. Daddy, please don't let us leave. Roderick slowly ascended the steps, sitting beside his son. No one is leaving forever, son. I promise. Your mother is right that sometimes we need space to resolve adult matters. But I will always be here for you no matter what happens. Christine watched the interaction with vigilant eyes. Go pack your things, Matthew. Take only the essentials. We'll buy what you need in the Cotswolds. Reluctantly, the boy got up and went to his room, leaving his parents alone again. Don't do this. Christine, Roderick pleaded, his voice low so Matthew wouldn't hear. If you take him like this without an agreement, it will be considered parental alienation. I can get a court injunction to stop you. Try, she challenged. By then we'll be far away. And if you insist, I'll tell everyone how you defended the housekeeper who tried to destroy our family. Imagine what your partners, clients, and friends will think. The threat was empty. Roderick knew his reputation would survive any scandal, but the time required for a legal battle could mean weeks, perhaps months without seeing Matthew. And during that period, what would Christine do to distance the boy from Louisa? What other lies would she tell? Let me at least say goodbye to him properly, he asked, seeing that he couldn't dissuade her at that moment. Christine hesitated, but nodded. You have 10 minutes, and just to be clear, if you try anything to stop our trip, you will never see Matthew again. I have friends willing to take us in places where you will never find us. The threat sent a chill down Roderick's spine. He knew Christine well enough to know she wasn't bluffing. Her obsessive love for Matthew made her capable of extreme acts. In the room, he found his son putting some toys into a backpack, his face marked by silent tears. Hey, champ. Can I help? Matthew ran into his father's arms, hugging him tightly. I don't want to go, Dad. Please don't let us go. Roderick felt a lump in his throat. It's just for a little while, son. Sometimes adults need space to sort out their problems. But I want you to know one thing. I will never, ever stop looking for you. I will always be here waiting, no matter how long it takes. Promise? I promise. And one more thing. Louisa won't give up on you either. She loves you, just like me, just like your mum. It's just that adults sometimes get confused about the best way to show that love. Matthew wiped his tears with the back of his hand. "When I grow up, I'm going to live in a big house where everyone can stay together. You, Mum, Louisa. No one will have to leave." The innocence of the solution proposed by the boy made Roderick smile sadly. "That would be wonderful, son." He helped Matthew finish packing his things, secretly including a small tracker in the lining of the teddy bear. He no longer trusted Christine to keep her word about their whereabouts. He also wrote his personal mobile number on a piece of paper, hiding it in the internal pocket of the boy's backpack. "If you need to talk to me for any reason, use this number. I'll answer any time, no matter the hour." Matthew nodded solemnly, carefully putting away the paper. "I'll call every day. I'll be waiting." When Christine appeared at the door to pick him up, Roderick gave his son one last hug, holding back tears. "I love you, son." "Remember that." Outside the mansion, a driver was already waiting with the car ready. Roderick watched helplessly as Christine and Matthew got into the vehicle. The last glimpse he had of his son was his small hand waving sadly from the rear window as the car disappeared through the gate. As soon as he was alone, Roderick picked up the phone and made 2 calls. The first to his lawyer, explaining the situation and requesting immediate legal measures to prevent Christine from leaving the city with Matthew. The second, surprisingly, was to Louisa. "We need to talk," he said simply when she answered. Christine took Matthew and threatened to disappear with him. "We need to act fast." On the other end of the line, Louisa felt her heart race with worry. "I'm on my way." Meanwhile, in the car heading towards the M1 motorway, Matthew looked out the window, feeling that something very important was happening in his life, something bigger than his 6-year-old mind could fully comprehend. Christine held his hand tightly, as if afraid he might disappear at any moment. "Everything will be all right, my love," she repeated, more to herself than to her son. "Mummy will take care of everything." What neither of them knew was that this day would mark the beginning of a separation that would last much longer than anyone could imagine, and that the reunion, when it finally happened, would be in circumstances that would forever change the destiny of everyone involved. 5 years can transform landscapes, cities, and above all, people. The sun rose over the East London landfill, illuminating the contours of the small improvised shack where Louisa and Matthew had found refuge. The boy, now 11 years old, rummaged through a pile of recyclable materials, carefully separating plastics, metals, and cardboard. His skilled fingers worked with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this for a long time. His face, still childish but marked by a premature maturity, remained focused on the task. He was taller, naturally, but his thinness was extreme, the result of years of precarious eating. His clothes, mended many times, hung on his body as if they belonged to someone larger. "Mum, I found 3 more whole glass bottles," he announced, holding up the discovered treasure. "I think that's enough to fill a bag today." From the entrance of the shack, Louisa slowly emerged, each movement a visible effort. At 29, she seemed to have aged decades. Her skeletal body, her dull, prematurely grey hair, her eyes sunken with permanent dark circles. Everything about her spoke of an existence of extreme deprivation. "Good work, my son," she said with a weak smile. "Put them over there with the others. If we can deliver everything today, maybe we can buy some fruit." Life in the landfill had not been a choice for either of them, but the result of a sequence of tragic events that began that fateful afternoon, 5 years earlier, when Christine and Matthew left for the Cotswolds. Roderick had acted quickly, obtaining a court injunction, preventing Christine from leaving the county with her son without authorization. When the police arrived at the country house, however, they found it empty. Christine had anticipated the move and gone to another destination, beginning a flight that lasted months. Using his knowledge of the business world and influential contacts, Roderick tracked his ex-wife and son through 5 counties, always arriving days or hours after they had left. The tracker in Matthew's teddy bear only worked for 2 weeks before its battery ran out. Meanwhile, Louisa faced her own legal battle. With the help of Dr. Teresa, she filed a claim for recognition of maternity and a request for regulated visits. The process, however, ran into an unexpected obstacle. Without Matthew and Christine present for DNA tests and hearings, the case stalled. It was on a rainy September night, 6 months after the disappearance, that the turnaround happened. Roderick received an anonymous call informing him that Christine and Matthew were at an exclusive resort in Cornwall. He immediately flew to Plymouth, accompanied by bailiffs and his lawyer. The reunion was tumultuous. Christine, cornered, tried to flee through the back of the resort with Matthew but was intercepted. The boy, confused and frightened, cried upon seeing his father after so long. The scene, witnessed by guests and staff, ended up on the front pages of newspapers the next day. Alistair Construction heir rescued after kidnapping by own mother. The ensuing scandal destroyed what remained of Christine's reputation. Investigations revealed secret bank accounts, false identities used during the escape, and a detailed plan to leave the country with Matthew using forged documents. Facing serious criminal charges and the prospect of completely losing contact with her son, as she finally agreed to cooperate. In a cold courtroom, Christine finally confessed the whole truth: the secret agreement with Louisa years earlier, the lies to Roderick about the origin of the adoption, the fabrication of false accusations against the housekeeper, and how she had intercepted all attempts at contact between Louisa and Matthew. The confession came as part of an agreement that would allow her to maintain supervised visits with her son. In exchange for relinquishing custody, Roderick obtained temporary custody of Matthew, then 7 years old. The boy was emotionally shaken, suspicious, confused about whom he should call mum. Psychologists appointed by the court recommended a period of adaptation before any contact with Louisa, so as not to further burden the child. It was during this delicate phase that fate intervened again, in a cruel way. When the time finally came to arrange the reunion between Louisa and Matthew, no one could locate her. She had completely disappeared. What no one knew was that Louisa, after months of legal battle with no concrete results, had faced a severe health crisis. The combination of extreme stress, inadequate nutrition, and precarious living conditions led to her collapse. Without health insurance or resources, she was treated in a public hospital and later transferred to a recovery clinic run by a charity on the outskirts of the city. When she was finally discharged 3 months later, she discovered she had lost the small room she rented due to lack of payment. All her belongings, including the case documents and her lawyer's contact, had been discarded. Without money, without documents, and with her health still fragile, Louisa found herself forced to accept the only option available: a shelter for vulnerable women. It was there, watching a local news report, that she saw the headline that would change everything again: Alistair heir goes for recovery after trauma of maternal kidnapping. The report showed images of Roderick leaving the court with Matthew, while the narration explained that the boy would be sent to an international boarding school, away from the media spotlight, for his protection and emotional recovery. Desperate at the prospect of losing contact with her son definitively, Louisa fled the shelter that same night. Without a plan or resources, she went to the only place she knew where to find Roderick: the mansion in Kensington. What she didn't expect was to find the property empty, with a "for sale" sign on the gate. The security guard informed her that Mr. Alistair had moved to an undisclosed residence and that the boy was already abroad. For weeks, Louisa desperately tried to locate Roderick or obtain any information about Matthew. She slept in squares, begged for food in restaurants, used public toilets to keep herself minimally presentable while visiting law offices, courts, and even the headquarters of Alistair Construction. Everywhere she found closed doors. It was on a rainy afternoon, seeking shelter under the canopy of a commercial building, that Louisa saw Matthew. He was getting out of an armored SUV, accompanied by a man who appeared to be a security guard, and quickly entering the building. Without thinking twice, she ran towards him. "Matthew! Matthew, it's me, Louisa!" The boy turned, surprised. For an instant his eyes lit up in recognition, but before he could respond, the security guard stepped between them, pushing Louisa away. "Step back, madam. This is Matthew Alistair, and I have express orders to prevent any unauthorized approach. You don't understand, I'm his mother. Matthew, tell him who I am." Confused and frightened, the boy looked from one to the other. I know her. It's Louisa." "Yes, it's me." "I've been looking for you, my son." The security guard, impassive, kept Louisa at bay. "Mr. Matthew, please go into the building. I'll handle this, but now please, Those are your father's orders. Reluctantly, Matthew obeyed, casting one last look at Louisa before disappearing through the automatic doors. You're causing a scene, the security guard said when they were alone. I suggest you leave before I have to call the police. I need to speak to Roderick Alistair. Please tell him Louisa is here, that I need to see my son. Something in the woman's desperate tone seemed to touch the security guard. After a moment of hesitation, he took a card from his pocket. I can't promise anything, but I will inform Mr. Alistair about your contact. Leave your number on this card. Louisa took the card with trembling hands, only to realize the problem. I don't have a phone. I have nothing. I've been living on the street since I left the hospital. The man studied her for a moment, noticing her worn clothes and debilitated appearance. I understand. Stay in the lobby of the building next door. If Mr. Alistair wants to see you, I'll send someone to fetch you. Louisa waited for 6 hours in that lobby, ignoring the suspicious glances of the doorman. When the security guard finally returned, his face was grim. Mr. Alistair will not be able to see you today, but he asked me to give you this. It was an envelope containing money, enough for a few weeks of lodging and basic food, and a handwritten note. Louisa, it's not safe for us to meet now. Christine has filed a new appeal claiming you are a threat to Matthew's well-being. Any contact could harm the case. Please use this money for your immediate needs. I will contact you when possible. R. Louisa felt her world collapse. Once again she was being separated from her son, now by Roderick himself, who had previously seemed her ally. Without the strength to fight, she accepted the money, the need to survive speaking louder than pride. In the following weeks, she rented a simple room and tried to re-establish herself. She looked for a job, but without complete documents and references, doors closed before they even opened. When the money ran out, she tried to contact the Alistair construction headquarters again, only to be informed that Roderick was on an extended trip abroad with his son. Louisa's situation deteriorated rapidly. Evicted again for lack of payment, she found herself on the streets, joining the thousands of invisible people who populate the pavements of London. This is how she arrived at the East London landfill, where other scavengers taught her to survive by collecting recyclable materials. What she didn't know was that, in reality, Roderick was facing his own battle. Christine, determined to regain Matthew at any cost, had hired the best lawyers in the country. Using the brief interaction between Louisa and Matthew as evidence, she obtained a temporary court order prohibiting any contact between the boy and his biological mother, alleging psychological disturbance and risk of new escape. Roderick, trying to protect Matthew from further judicial traumas, chose to strictly follow the order while working behind the scenes to reverse it. He sent private investigators to locate Louisa, planning to help her re-establish herself properly before reintroducing her into his son's life. But Louisa had disappeared again, swallowed by the invisibility of extreme poverty. The investigators searched hospitals, shelters, hostels, never thinking of scouring the city's landfills. And so time passed. Weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. Matthew, meanwhile, grew up under his father's watchful and loving care. Roderick had drastically reduced his professional commitments to dedicate himself to his son, trying to fill the void left by his maternal absences. The boy attended an excellent private school, had regular psychological support, and all the privileges that the Alistair fortune could provide. But something essential was missing. Despite all of Roderick's efforts, Matthew remained emotionally reserved, as if a part of him was always waiting for another abandonment, another separation. At night, his father often found him looking at old family photographs or drawing scenes of a house where 3 adults and a child lived. Supervised visits with Christine were tense and uncomfortable. She, religiously fulfilling the judicial determinations and psychological treatment ordered by the court, tried to reconnect with her son. Matthew, polite but distant, participated in the proposed activities without enthusiasm, like someone fulfilling an obligation. When he turned 10 during a family therapy session, Matthew finally verbalized what had tormented him for so long. I wanted to know what happened to Louisa. No one ever tells me anything about her. The therapist looked at Roderick, who had avoided the subject for years, following the recommendation not to burden his son with more complexities while he was still processing the trauma of the maternal kidnapping. Your father can answer that, Matthew. I think you're old enough to understand some things now. Roderick hesitated, but faced with his son's determined gaze, he knew it was time for the truth. We tried to find her, son, for a very long time. I hired people specialized in locating missing persons. But after that day you saw her near the office, she completely disappeared. No one knows where she is. Did she abandon me too? Matthew asked, his voice small. No, son. I'm sure she didn't. I think life was very hard on her. Without money, without a home, without support. It's easy to disappear in a big city like London. She might be... Matthew didn't finish the sentence, but the fear was evident in his eyes. Don't think about that, Roderick hastened to reassure him. Louisa is strong, a survivor. Wherever she is, I'm sure she still thinks of you every day. The conversation planted a seed in Matthew's mind. In the following months, he began to pay more attention to the homeless people he saw during car rides through the city. His eyes scrutinized every female face, looking for familiar features. He began to save part of his allowance and asked the driver to stop so he could distribute snacks and water to rough sleepers. Roderick, observing his son's behavior, felt a mixture of pride and concern. One night he found Matthew in the mansion's office, attentively studying a map of the city. "What are you doing up so late, son?" "Marking the places where homeless people usually stay," he replied without taking his eyes off the map. "If we keep looking, we might find Louisa one day." Roderick sat beside his son, gently placing his hand on his. "Matthew, London has over 12 million people. And unfortunately, thousands of them live on the streets. It's not that simple. But we can't give up," the boy insisted. "She didn't give up on me when she found me lost at 6 years old. Remember, you told me she could have just left me there. But she took me with her and looked after me." Roderick nodded, remembering how Louisa, even in a situation of extreme vulnerability, had sacrificed to protect Matthew when she found him run away. "You're right. We shouldn't give up. I'll intensify the searches again." And so he did. In the following months, Roderick hired a new team of investigators, more specialized in locating homeless people. They distributed photos of Louisa in shelters, social assistance centers, public hospitals. They offered a reward for information, but the silence persisted. What no one imagined was that Louisa and Matthew were in a way closer than ever. The East London landfill where she had found refuge was exactly in the area that Alistair Construction had recently acquired for its next major urban revitalization project. And so, while father and son intensified their searches across the city, Louisa survived just a few miles away, scavenging among the discards of society. The cruel irony of fate kept them separated by a distance that could be covered on foot in less than half an hour. Until that December morning, 5 years after the separation, when Roderick decided to personally visit the site of his new project, the cycle of missed encounters finally broke. Returning to the present, Matthew continued his task of separating recyclables, while Louisa prepared a simple meal with the few provisions they had managed to get the day before. In recent months, her health had deteriorated significantly. The persistent cough, extreme weakness, and frequent fainting were clear signs that her body was succumbing to the adverse conditions. "Mum, you need to rest more today," Matthew said, noticing how precariously she leaned on the shack's structure. "I can take the material to the recycling center by myself." Louisa smiled weakly. "You already do so much, my son. But you're right, I'm feeling a bit tired today." It was an understatement. In recent weeks, she could barely stand for more than a few minutes. Matthew had taken on almost all tasks, becoming the main provider for that small improvised family unit. "When you get better, we'll look for a better place to stay," he would often say, nurturing a dream they both knew was increasingly distant. "Maybe I can get a real job next year when I turn 12. Louisa just smiled, not daring to destroy her son's hope. In her most brutal moments of lucidity, she knew she probably wouldn't live to see the next year. Her only comfort was knowing that Matthew had grown strong, intelligent and resilient, despite all adversities. That day, as Matthew prepared to take the collected material, an unusual movement caught the attention of the landfill residents. Luxury cars parked at the entrance to the site, and men in suits began to circulate, taking photos and making notes. "What's happening?" Matthew asked one of the older scavengers. Looks like they're going to build something here. They say they sold the land to a big construction company. A chill ran down the boy's spine. Does that mean we'll have to leave? Probably. It always happens like this. First come the men in suits, then the machines, and we have to find another place. Matthew ran back to the shack where Louisa was resting. Mum, I think we'll need to move. There are important people at the entrance. Louisa tried to get up, but a coughing fit brought her down again. Matthew supported her as best he could, offering water from a reused bottle. We need to leave before they kick us out, she whispered between difficult breaths. Help me up, son. As they tried to gather their few belongings, they heard voices approaching. Matthew peeked through the opening of the shack and saw two men in suits walking towards them. One of them, taller and with grey hair at the temples, looked around with evident discomfort. Sir, are you sure you need to see this area personally? The social impact report has already accounted for approximately 30 families living here. The social assistance team is preparing the relocation plan. I need to see it with my own eyes, Charles. I don't just want numbers in a report. These are real people with real stories. Matthew froze. That voice. There was something strangely familiar about it. He retreated into the shack, his heart racing. Mum, someone's coming. I think they're the owners of the land. Louisa tried to get up again, leaning on her son. We need to ask for more time. Explain that I'm sick, that we can't leave now. Matthew nodded and stepped out of the shack to face the visitors, placing himself protectively at the entrance. His thin body, small for his age, barely blocked the passage, but his posture was that of someone who would defend that space with all his might. Please, we can't leave now, he said firmly as the men approached. My mum is very ill. The older man stopped abruptly, studying the boy's face with disconcerting intensity. Something in his eyes changed. First confusion, then shock, and finally an emotion Matthew couldn't identify. Matthew? The voice came out as an incredulous whisper. It was the boy's turn to freeze. How did this stranger know his name? He recoiled a step defensively. How do you know my name? But the man didn't answer. He advanced slowly, his eyes fixed on the boy's face as if seeing a ghost. When he was close enough, he knelt to be at Matthew's height, completely ignoring the dirt that stained his expensive suit. Matthew, he repeated, his voice choked. It's me, your father. The world seemed to freeze around them. Matthew felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. This man couldn't be his father. His father was a distant figure in his fragmented memories, a man who never found them, who never looked for them during all those years of suffering. My father abandoned us, he replied bitterly. My mum is the only family I have. No, son, Roderick's voice trembled. I never stopped looking for you. Not for a single day. At that moment, a faint groan came from inside the shack, followed by the sound of something falling. Matthew turned immediately. Mum! He ran inside, followed by Roderick, who bent down to pass through the narrow opening. What he saw inside horrified him. Louisa collapsed on the shack floor, unconscious, her skeletal body barely covered by worn clothes many times larger than her current size. Help! Matthew cried desperately. Please, she needs help. Roderick was paralyzed for an instant, unable to fully process what he saw. Louisa, the healthy young housekeeper he had known years ago, reduced to this state of extreme physical deterioration. And Matthew, his son whom he had searched for incessantly, living in these inhumane conditions, calling her mum. Recovering from the initial shock, Roderick acted quickly. Charles, call an ambulance immediately. And tell Dr. Stone to meet us at the Portland hospital. As his assistant ran to make the calls, Roderick approached Louisa, checking her vital signs. Her pulse was weak, irregular, her breathing shallow. Will she be okay? Matthew asked, his face contorted with fear. She's been ill for a long time, but she's never fainted like this. Roderick couldn't answer immediately. Guilt consumed him. While he and his son lived in the comfort of a mansion, looking for Louisa in hospitals and shelters, she was here literally dying in a landfill, caring for Matthew with the little she could provide. We're taking her to the best hospital in the city, he finally said. She'll receive all the necessary care, I promise. Matthew looked suspiciously at the man who claimed to be his father. Years of living on the streets had taught him to doubt easy promises. Why would you help us? Why now after so long? The question hit. Roderick like a knife. How to explain to his son that he had never given up the search, that he had hired investigators, offered rewards, searched every hospital and shelter in the city? How to make him understand that, by some cruel irony of fate, they had never thought to look in the landfill adjacent to the land his own company had just bought. "Matthew, there's a lot I need to explain, but now we need to take care of Louisa. Do you trust me enough for that?" The boy looked at his unconscious mother, then at the man who claimed to be his father. There was no choice. "I just want her to be okay. That's what we want too." Minutes later, which felt like hours, they heard the ambulance sirens. Paramedics entered the landfill, guided by Roderick's assistant, and quickly prepared Louisa for transport. Matthew did not let go of her hand at any point, even during the transfer to the stretcher. "I need to go with her," he insisted when one of the paramedics suggested he wait. "Of course you do," Roderick agreed immediately. "We'll all go together." On the way to the hospital, while the paramedics worked to stabilize Louisa, Roderick watched Matthew, the son he believed to be abroad with his mother all these years. How was it possible? What had really happened? "Matthew," he called softly, "how long have you two been living in that place?" The boy took a while to answer, his eyes fixed on Louisa's unconscious face. "Since we left the big house, I think 5 years. Big house? Do you remember it?" "A bit. I remember the marble staircase, my room full of toys, Mrs. Eleanor in the kitchen, and I remember you and my other mum fighting a lot." Roderick felt a lump in his throat. "Matthew, what happened after you and Christine left the mansion? How did you end up with Louisa in the landfill? My other mum got very angry when Louisa took me back home after I ran away. She said we were going to travel far away, just the two of us. We stayed in many different hotels. She always said you were going to find us and take me away, so we had to keep moving." Roderick nodded slowly. This confirmed what he already knew about Christine's flight with their son. "One day my other mum was very nervous. She said we needed to leave that hotel immediately. But as we were leaving, she saw Louisa in the lobby." "Louisa was there?" Roderick asked, surprised. "None of the investigators' reports ever mentioned such an encounter." Matthew nodded. "She had seen us on TV and came looking. My other mum was furious, said Louisa was chasing us, that she was going to kidnap me. She called the hotel security." Matthew's eyes filled with tears at the memory. "I didn't want them to fight. I ran to Louisa. My other mum tried to pull me back, but I clung to Louisa. There was a lot of confusion. People were shouting. I was crying. And then—" He hesitated, as if the memory was too painful. "Then, my other mum said that if I wanted to stay with Louisa so much, then I should go with her and never come back. She said she didn't want an ungrateful son who preferred a housekeeper to his own mother anymore." Roderick closed his eyes, feeling a wave of anger against Christine. His ex-wife's obsessive selfishness had reached this point, rejecting her own son in a fit of jealousy and wounded pride. "The security guards kicked us out of the hotel," Matthew continued. "Louisa tried to take me back to you, but she didn't know where you were. We went to the big house, but different people were living there. We tried the construction company, but they wouldn't let us in because we were too dirty after days on the street." Every word was like a dagger in Roderick's heart. While he desperately searched for his son, Louisa desperately tried to find him to return Matthew. "Louisa was afraid to go to the police," the boy explained. "My other mum had told everyone that she tried to kidnap me. We thought they would arrest her and send me back to my other mum. So we stayed hidden. For 5 years?" Roderick could barely comprehend. "Why didn't you try to make contact again?" Matthew shrugged as if the answer was obvious. "At first we tried. Louisa sent notes to the construction company, but never got a reply. Then we ran out of money, nowhere to live. She got sicker and sicker. At the landfill, at least we had a roof and could get money selling recyclables. She always said that one day you would find us, but I stopped believing." The ambulance arrived at the hospital, interrupting the conversation. As Louisa was quickly taken for emergency treatment, Roderick kept his arm around Matthew's shoulders, noticing how tense the boy was, suspicious, ready to flee at the slightest sign of danger. "No one will separate you," he promised. "I will personally ensure that Louisa receives the best possible treatment. And you, Matthew, will never go hungry or sleep rough again. No matter how long it takes, I will fix all of this." The boy looked up, studying his father's face, searching for signs of lies or deception. He found only guilt, regret, and a fierce determination that somehow seemed familiar, perhaps because he himself had developed it during the years of survival in the landfill. "She's all I have," he said simply. "Don't let her go." Roderick hugged his son, feeling for the first time the fragile, tense body that years of deprivation had shaped. "I won't let her go," he promised. "Neither her nor you. Never again." The Portland hospital was a world apart. In the silent corridors of the private floor, doctors and nurses moved with discreet efficiency, attending to London's wealthiest patients. In a private suite, Louisa drifted between consciousness and drug-induced sleep, her fragile body connected to various equipment. Sitting by the bed, Matthew observed every movement, every expression on his mother's face. 3 days had passed since the rescue from the landfill, and the boy remained in a state of constant alert, as if fearing that everything was just an ephemeral dream that could dissipate at any moment. "She's much better today," said Dr. Camilla Stone, an internal medicine specialist, as she checked the medical records. "The antibiotics are working, and the malnutrition is already being adequately treated. With time and patience, Louisa will recover." Matthew nodded silently without taking his eyes off his mother. She had lost so much weight in recent months that her prominent bones seemed about to tear through her skin. Despite the hospital bath and the new clothes Roderick had provided, she still seemed out of place in that aseptic luxury environment, a small survivor snatched from the urban jungle and placed in a glass dome. "You also need to rest," the doctor continued, now addressing the boy. "Your tests showed some nutritional deficiencies and mild anemia. Your body needs time to recover." "I'm fine," he replied automatically, the same answer he gave when Louisa worried about him at the landfill. "I just want her to wake up." Across the room, Roderick watched the scene with a heavy heart. In the last 3 days, he had mobilized the country's best specialists, ordered complete examinations for Louisa and Matthew, and provided everything money could buy to ensure their recovery. But he knew the road would be long, not only for their physical health, but mainly to rebuild the emotional ties shattered by years of separation and suffering. "Matthew," he called softly, "how about we go to the cafeteria to get something to eat while the nurse does her procedures?" "I promise we'll be right back." The boy hesitated. Since arriving at the hospital, he refused to leave Louisa's room as if fearing she might disappear during his absence. He slept on the sofa next to the bed, ate his meals right there, and only agreed to take a bath in the adjacent bathroom, with the door ajar to maintain visual contact. "What if she wakes up and doesn't see me here?" he asked, the insecurity evident in his voice. "Dr. Stone just gave her medication so she can rest comfortably. She won't wake up for the next 30 minutes at least," Roderick assured him. "Besides, Nurse Maria will be here the whole time and will call us immediately if there's any change." After a few more seconds of hesitation, Matthew finally nodded and got up from the chair he had occupied for hours. His movements were cautious, calculated, as if he was always ready to face some imminent threat. Roderick noticed how his son avoided touching him or getting too close, an invisible barrier he hadn't yet been able to cross. In the hospital cafeteria, an elegant environment with views of the internal gardens, Roderick ordered a nutritious snack for his son, following the nutritionist's recommendations. As they ate in silence, he tried to find words to start a genuine conversation. "How are you feeling, Matthew?" "With the new clothes, the room—" The boy shrugged. "It's strange. The bed is too soft, I can't sleep properly." "You'll get used to it in time," Roderick replied, trying to sound comforting. "Your body is still adjusting to everything." "What's going to happen to us when Mum gets better?" Matthew asked suddenly, getting straight to the point that truly worried him. "Where are we going?" Roderick took a deep breath. It was a complex question, with legal and emotional implications that he had discussed at length with his lawyers in recent days. "I have a house prepared for you," he explained. "A comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood with everything you need. You'll go back to school, of course, when you're ready, and Louisa will receive all the necessary medical support for her complete recovery." Matthew frowned, processing the information. "And you? Are you going to live with us?" The question caught Roderick off guard. Well, initially I thought about living nearby, to always be available, but to give you space to adapt. But if you prefer me to be more present—" "I don't know," Matthew interrupted honestly. I barely know you. Mum always spoke highly of you, said you would never give up on finding me, but it's been 5 years. The pain in his son's voice deeply affected Roderick. Matthew, if I could go back in time and do things differently, believe me, I would. I never imagined you could be so close and in such miserable, the boy completed, with a frankness that only life on the streets could teach. We survived. Some people don't even manage that. The premature maturity in the 11-year-old's words was simultaneously admirable and devastating. While children his age worried about video games and homework, Matthew had learned to fight for daily survival, care for a sick mother, and find value in what society discarded. You're incredible, you know, Roderick said, his voice choked. So strong, so resilient. Matthew looked away, visibly uncomfortable with the compliment. Mum taught me everything. She never complained, even when she hadn't eaten all day to give me her share. She always said that one day things would get better. And they did, Roderick confirmed. I swear that from now on you will never again experience hardship. And I will do everything possible to make up for all the lost time. When they returned to the room, they found Louisa awake, her eyes half closed, trying to adjust to the brightness. Matthew rushed to the bed, holding her hand carefully so as not to dislodge the IV. Mum, are you okay? Louisa smiled weakly, gently squeezing her son's hand. I'm better, darling. Her voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. Then her gaze slowly moved across the room until it found Roderick standing a few feet from the bed. A complex mixture of emotions crossed her face. Surprise, confusion, relief, and finally a kind of resignation. Roderick, she said simply. So it wasn't a dream? No, he replied, approaching cautiously. We found you, finally. For a long moment they just looked at each other, two survivors of an emotional shipwreck, recognizing in each other the scars left by the storm. There was so much to say, so many explanations, recriminations, apologies. But at that moment only silence seemed appropriate. It was Matthew who broke the moment. Dad said we're getting a new house when you get better, Mum. A real house. Louisa looked at Roderick, a silent question in her eyes. It's true, he confirmed. Everything is ready. You two will be together as it should be. And I'll be around if you'll allow me. Why would you do that? Louisa asked without hostility, just a genuine incomprehension. After so long. Because it's the least I can do. Because I spent 5 years tirelessly looking for you. Because... Roderick hesitated, looking at Matthew, who was following the conversation attentively. Because we are a family, even if in an unconventional way. The following weeks were of adjustments and adaptations. Louisa's physical recovery progressed slowly. Her body, weakened by years of deprivation, needed time to fully respond to treatments. Matthew, on the other hand, showed the incredible resilience of children, gaining weight and vigor every day. When she was finally discharged from the hospital, Louisa was taken to the house Roderick had prepared, a comfortable but not ostentatious residence in Hampstead, with spacious rooms, a garden and all the necessary facilities for her continued recovery, including a nurse who came daily and a physiotherapist 3 times a week. For Matthew, readjusting to normal life was a mix of discoveries and challenges. After educational assessments, it was found that, despite years without formal education, he had maintained a surprising level of basic knowledge. Louisa, even in the most adverse conditions, had never stopped teaching him to read, write, and do sums, using discarded materials they found in the landfill. She always separated books and notebooks that people threw away, Matthew explained to Roderick, as he showed a worn notebook where he practiced mathematical operations. She said that education was the only thing no one could take from me. Roderick hired private tutors to help Matthew catch up, with the aim of eventually integrating him into the regular school system. To his surprise, the boy showed an extraordinary aptitude for learning, absorbing concepts with a speed that impressed educators. He has an incredible analytical mind, commented the maths teacher after one of the sessions, and a creative problem-solving ability that only comes from life experience. As days turned into weeks, a routine began to establish itself. Roderick visited daily, usually in the late afternoon, always bringing something for Matthew, a book, an educational game, or simply ingredients for them to prepare a recipe together in the kitchen. Gradually, the barrier of mistrust the boy maintained began to diminish. Louisa observed this rapprochement with contradictory feelings. On one hand, she rejoiced in seeing her son finally getting to know his father, having the opportunity that had been denied to him for so long. On the other, a persistent insecurity tormented her. What if Matthew, accustomed to the comfortable life Roderick could provide, began to distance himself from her? One afternoon, while Matthew was in his science class in the office adapted as a study room, Roderick found Louisa alone in the garden, sitting in a rocking chair, watching the birds. "May I join you?" he asked. She nodded, indicating the empty chair beside her. She was visibly better. She had gained some weight, colour had returned to her face, and the dental treatment Roderick had provided had restored her smile. But her eyes still carried the weight of lived experiences, a shadow that perhaps would never completely disappear. "Matthew is doing very well in his classes," Roderick commented, seeking to start the conversation. "The teachers are impressed with his ability to absorb new knowledge." "He's always been like that since he was little," Louisa replied, a slight maternal pride colouring her voice. "Even in the worst times at the landfill, he always found time to read, learn, ask questions about how things worked." A comfortable silence settled between them, filled only by the sounds of the garden. Finally, Roderick gathered the courage to address the subject he had been postponing for weeks. "Louisa, I need you to know, I never gave up looking for you. I hired investigators, offered rewards, checked hospitals, shelters, police stations. How is it possible that we never thought of the landfill?" "You were so close all this time," she sighed deeply. "During the first year, I tried to make contact several times. I sent notes to the construction company, tried to call, even went personally to the headquarters once. But there were always barriers. Receptionists who wouldn't pass on messages, security guards who prevented me from entering because of my appearance. And then when the money ran out and my health started to worsen, survival became the only priority." "I'm so sorry," Roderick said, his voice choked. "If I could go back—" "We can't change the past," Louisa interrupted softly. "The important thing is that Matthew now has a real chance at life. It's all I ever wanted for him." "And you?" Roderick asked. "What do you want for yourself?" The question caught Louisa off guard. For so long her focus had been exclusively on Matthew's survival that she had barely allowed herself to think about personal desires. "I don't know," she admitted after a pause. "I spent so long just trying to stay alive to care for him that I forgot what it's like to have my own dreams." Roderick watched her attentively. Even after everything she had been through, Louisa maintained an impressive dignity, an inner strength that overcame any resentment or bitterness. "When you are fully recovered, I would like to offer you a role at the institute we are creating," he said, referring to the social project he was developing on the land where the landfill once stood. "No one better than you to help people in similar situations to what you experienced. Of course, if you wish, I perfectly understand if you prefer another path." Louisa considered the proposal in silence. The idea of transforming her painful experience into something positive, of helping others avoid the suffering she went through, touched her deeply. "I would need to study first," she finally replied. "Complete my education, maybe take some social work course. I want to be able to contribute meaningfully, not just because I lived the experience." Roderick smiled, admiring her determination. "Everything will be provided when you feel ready. There's no rush." The sound of quick footsteps interrupted the conversation. Matthew came running through the garden, a sparkle of enthusiasm in his eyes. "Mum, Dad, the teacher said I can start regular school next semester. She thinks I can keep up with my year group with only a few extra lessons." The identical pride that appeared on Louisa's and Roderick's faces created, for a brief moment, a silent connection between them, the shared love for the son who, against all odds, had survived and was now flourishing. "That's wonderful." "Son," Louisa said, hugging him. "I knew you could do it," Roderick added, resting his hand on the boy's shoulder. Matthew looked from one to the other, and for the first time since the reunion, his smile was completely free of shadows or hesitations. For a moment, they almost seemed like a normal family, sharing an everyday achievement in a sunny garden. But the past was not, something that could simply be forgotten. That same night, Matthew woke up screaming, trapped in a nightmare where he was back in the landfill, desperately searching for Louisa among mountains of waste. It took long minutes to calm him. With Louisa holding him firmly, assuring him they were safe, that they would never return to that place. "I'm afraid everything will disappear," the boy confessed between sobs. "That I'll wake up and will be back there, hungry and cold." "Never again, my son," Louisa promised, rocking him as she used to when he was smaller. "This life is real and permanent. No one will take this from us." In the next room, Roderick heard his sons crying, feeling simultaneously helpless and determined. The emotional damage caused by years of suffering would not be healed overnight, perhaps never completely. But he would do everything in his power to ensure that Matthew and Louisa had the chance to rebuild their lives with dignity and security. The road would be long, the scars too deep to simply disappear. But in that quiet house, where once there were only strangers united by tragic circumstances, the first delicate threads of a true family began to intertwine. 4 years passed since the reunion at the landfill. Spring arrived in London, covering the city with explosions of yellow and purple trees, a colourful contrast to the concrete grey. On the old site where mountains of waste once stood, now stood a modern complex of low-rise buildings and green areas, the New Paths Institute, a national reference in social reintegration for vulnerable people. At the main entrance, a discreet plaque read, "Executive Director Louisa Ferris." At 33, Louisa had transformed not only physically, regaining the health and natural beauty that years of deprivation had obscured, but primarily in her professional and personal trajectory. After completing high school in record time and specializing in social work, she took over the direction of the institute created by Roderick, becoming a respected voice in debates on public policies for the homeless population. In her spacious and airy office, Louisa reviewed the final details for that afternoon's event, the graduation of the first class of the professional training program developed especially for women heads of household in vulnerable situations. 25 women who, like her years ago, fought daily to ensure the survival of their children. A soft knock on the door interrupted her concentration. "May I come in?" Matthew, now 15, appeared at the door. The teenager had developed surprisingly, tall for his age, with features that were beginning to show the transition from boy to young adult. Recovered from chronic malnutrition, he maintained a healthy physique thanks to swimming and basketball, which he practiced regularly. His eyes, however, still carried that premature maturity acquired in the difficult years, a window into a wisdom that young people his age rarely possessed. "Of course, son. Are you ready for the presentation?" Matthew nodded, nervously adjusting the tie of his private school uniform. "I rehearsed the speech one more time with Dad at breakfast. He said it's perfect, but I'm still nervous." Louisa smiled, proud. As the orator for the Youth Mentor Program class, teenagers who helped adults with literacy, Matthew would give a speech at the ceremony that afternoon. "Nervousness is normal. It means you care, but I know you'll be brilliant as always." The boy smiled shyly. Despite having completely caught up in his studies, in fact, advancing 2 years beyond his age group, and being considered one of the brightest students at his college, Matthew maintained a genuine humility, a result of the harsh lessons learned in childhood. "Dad said he's bringing a surprise for after the ceremony. Do you know what it is?" Louisa shook her head. "He didn't tell me anything. You know how Roderick likes his mysteries." The relationship between the three had evolved in a singular way over the years. Roderick, fulfilling his promise, remained nearby, initially in a separate house in the same neighborhood. Over time, as they worked together on the development of the institute, daily life with Louisa transformed mutual respect and shared concern for Matthew into something deeper. It had not been an easy road. The rebuilding of trust, especially on Louisa's part, required time and patience. The first months were marked by painful conversations, where each exposed their version of the events that separated them. Roderick revealing how Christine had manipulated everyone. Louisa describing the years of struggle for survival, both lamenting lost opportunities, missed encounters, searches that never crossed paths. Matthew, always an attentive observer, followed the evolution of his parents' relationship with a mixture of hope and caution. His greatest fear, that his father would eventually tire of them, or that his mother would not adapt to her new life, was gradually replaced by the realization that, despite all the scars, a new kind of family was forming. 2 years after the reunion, When Roderick finally asked permission to formally court Louisa, it was to Matthew that he first turned. "I love your mother," he had said in a frank conversation, "not just because she's your mother, but because of the extraordinary person she is. But I will only go ahead if you are comfortable with it." Matthew, then 13, considered the question with the seriousness that characterized his important decisions. "I think she deserves to be happy," he finally replied. "And you too." The previous year, Roderick and Louisa had formalized their union in an intimate ceremony, with only Matthew and a few close friends present. It wasn't a fairy tale happy ending, both carried scars too deep for such simplicity, but a new chance built on foundations of truth, respect and mutual understanding. "We need to go," Louisa said, consulting her watch. "Guests will start arriving in an hour, and I still want to check the final details of the cocktail party." As they walked down the Institute's corridor, several staff and students greeted them respectfully. For many there, Louisa and Matthew's story, modified to protect the family's privacy, but maintaining the essence of their journey from the landfill to recovery, was a source of inspiration, a tangible reminder that change was possible. In the spacious auditorium, already decorated for the ceremony, Roderick personally supervised the installation of the sound system. At 54, he maintained the same energy and determination in business, but had redefined his priorities. Alistair Construction, now under shared management with trusted partners, continued to prosper, but his personal focus had shifted to social projects, particularly those related to the Institute. "Is everything ready?" Louisa asked, approaching. Roderick smiled at seeing his wife and son. "Almost. Just adjusting the microphone for our star speaker." Matthew rolled his eyes, embarrassed. "Can I still back out?" "No way," his parents responded in unison, prompting laughter. As Roderick showed Matthew his position on stage, Louisa watched the interaction between father and son with a sense of fulfillment she never imagined possible in the dark days of the landfill. The connection between them had grown naturally. Roderick never tried to replace the lost years or deny the special bond Matthew and Louisa had forged in adversity, but had built his own relationship with his son based on respect, mutual admiration, and shared interests. The ceremony proceeded as planned, moving and emotional. The graduates, many accompanied by their young children, received their certificates with teary eyes and determined smiles. Some briefly shared their stories, tales of overcoming adversity that echoed aspects of Louisa's own journey, although none had faced such extreme trials. When it was time for Matthew's speech, an expectant silence filled the auditorium. The teenager walked onto the stage with firm steps, positioned himself before the microphone, and after a brief moment of hesitation, began to speak with surprising eloquence for someone so young. 4 years ago, I couldn't read properly, I didn't go to school, and I survived by picking through what others discarded, he began, causing a wave of emotion in the audience. I am not here to tell a story of individual triumph or to inspire you with motivational phrases. I am here because I was fortunate enough to have a mother who sacrificed everything for me to survive, and a father who never gave up looking for us. His eyes met Louisa's in the front row, then Roderick's right beside her. What I learned in these years is that no one recovers alone. No one lifts themselves by their bootstraps without support, without structure, without real opportunities. Each of the graduates today is not here solely by their own merit, although they have much merit, but because they finally found a system that did not punish them for their vulnerability, that did not blame them for circumstances often beyond their control. As the speech progressed, many in the auditorium discreetly wiped away tears. Matthew spoke with the authority of someone who had known misery in its rawest form, but also with the hope of someone who had witnessed the possibility of transformation. When you are in a landfill, trying to survive another day, the future seems an inaccessible luxury. But today, seeing these women ready to start over with dignity, I know that the future is not a privilege, it is a right that we all deserve. At the end, the audience rose in emotional applause. Louisa made no attempt to hold back the tears streaming freely down her face, while Roderick, visibly moved, kept his arm firmly around her shoulders. After the ceremony and the cocktail party, when the last guest finally departed, Roderick gathered Louisa and Matthew. I have a surprise for you, he announced, a mysterious twinkle in his eyes. "We need to go to the car." In the car park, a driver awaited them with a discreet van. Inside, to Louisa and Matthew's surprise, they found Mrs. Eleanor, the Alistair Mansion's former cook, now a lady with completely white hair. "Mrs. Eleanor," Matthew exclaimed, embracing the elderly woman warmly. "I've missed you so much." "My boy," she smiled, stroking the teenager's face. "Look how handsome and strong you've grown." As the vehicle moved through London's afternoon traffic, Roderick explained, "After today's ceremony, I thought it would be the perfect time to finally close an outstanding chapter. Mrs. Eleanor will accompany us because she maintained an important connection throughout all these years." Louisa and Matthew exchanged confused glances. When the car entered a secluded residential neighborhood, stopping in front of a simple but well-maintained townhouse, their curiosity increased. "Where are we?" Louisa asked. "You'll understand in a moment," Roderick replied, leading them to the door. It was Mrs. Eleanor who rang the doorbell. After a few moments, the door opened, revealing a woman of approximately 50 years old, with brown hair streaked with grey and tired eyes. Upon seeing the visitors, her face paled. "Christine," Roderick simply said. Louisa unconsciously took a step back, moving protectively closer to Matthew. The teenager, in turn, stood motionless, studying the face of the woman he had once called mother, a face that appeared only vaguely in his childhood memories. "Please, come in," Christine invited, her voice low, very different from the confident and dominating woman of years ago. The simple living room was impeccably organized. On the walls, several photographs of Matthew at different ages, some cut from newspapers and magazines that reported the Alistair family's charitable activities, others apparently provided by Mrs. Eleanor over the years. "You've been keeping in touch with her?" Matthew asked the cook, surprised. The elderly woman nodded. "After everything happened when your mother lost custody, she was very unwell, hospitalized for months. When she left the hospital, she had no one left. I couldn't just abandon her despite everything. We don't choose family, my child." Christine indicated the seats, keeping a respectful distance. "Why did you bring us here?" Louisa asked Roderick directly, the tension evident in her posture. "Because it's time to heal all wounds," he replied, "including this one. Christine has lived in almost total isolation since she lost the custody battle. The court agreement prevented her from making any direct contact with Matthew until he turned 15 and could decide for himself if he wanted to see her." Matthew looked at Christine with a complex expression, neither anger nor affection, but a cautious curiosity, like someone observing a museum piece that represents a distant period of history. "You abandoned me," he finally said, his voice controlled. "Who said you didn't want an ungrateful son anymore?" Christine closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the blow. When she reopened them, they were tear-filled. "There is no justification for what I did," she replied slowly. "For years I tried to find explanations, blame my emotional instability, the unhealthy obsession I developed out of fear of losing you. But the truth is simpler and more terrible. I was a selfish mother who loved the idea of having a child more than the child himself." The raw honesty of the confession surprised everyone. There were no traces of the manipulative Christine of before, just a woman broken by the weight of her own choices. "I followed your life from a distance," she continued, looking at Matthew. "Every achievement, every piece of news. I know about your talent for maths, your medals in science competitions, your volunteer work at the Institute. I know you've become an incredible young man, not thanks to me, but despite me." Matthew absorbed the words in silence. Louisa, by his side, kept her hand protectively on his shoulder, but without interfering. This was a moment her son needed to process in his own way. "Why did you bring us here today, specifically?" he asked Roderick. "Because tomorrow Christine will move to Brighton to live near her sister," Roderick explained. Before leaving, she wanted the opportunity to ask for forgiveness personally. Not to be forgiven, that would be asking too much, but so that you would know that she fully recognizes the extent of the damage caused. Christine nodded, confirming Roderick's words. "I don't expect you to see me as part of the family, or to want to maintain any future contact. I just wanted you to know that I deeply regret everything. Especially you, Louisa. Her voice broke as she addressed the woman she had harmed most directly. I destroyed your life out of pure selfishness. There is no possible reparation for that. A heavy silence fell over the room. Matthew looked at the floor, absorbing the impact of that unexpected encounter. Louisa in turn studied Christine's face, searching for vestiges of the arrogant woman she had known, but finding only the worn features of someone who had carried the burden of her own actions for years. I hated you for a long time, Louisa finally said, her voice low but firm. In the hardest days at the landfill, when Matthew cried from hunger and I had nothing to give him, I imagined 1,000 ways of revenge. But there came a point when survival demanded all available energy. There was no room for hatred. Christine wiped away a silent tear. I can't say I completely forgive you, Louisa continued. But I no longer carry anger either. It's exhausting, and life has already shown me that there are more important things to dedicate my energy to. Matthew finally looked up, staring directly at Christine. I don't remember much about you, he admitted. I have flashes of the big house, of some games, but they are fragments. The mum I know who raised me, who almost died so I could have enough to eat, is Louisa. The words, spoken without cruelty, but with unequivocal firmness, made Christine nod in resigned acceptance. It's fair, she simply replied. She earned that title in every possible way. After a moment of silence, Matthew got up, approaching one of the photographs on the wall, one that showed his first-year graduation at the new college. Did Mrs. Eleanor give you this? Christine nodded. She was my only contact with you all these years, my only friend when everyone else abandoned me. Matthew turned, observing the woman he had once called mother. There was no anger in his gaze, only an understanding beyond his years. I hope you find peace in Brighton, he finally said, and that you take better care of yourself than you took care of us. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was closure, permission for everyone to move on, without the weight of unresolved resentments. When they left Christine's house, the sun was beginning to set, painting the London sky with shades of orange and pink. In the car, Matthew remained silent for some time, processing the emotions of the encounter. Did you know about this? He finally asked Louisa. She shook her head. Your father kept it a secret from both of us. I think he feared I would refuse to go if I knew. And would you have refused? Roderick asked. Louisa considered the question. Probably not. As difficult as it was, Matthew deserved this closure. We all deserved it. The teenager looked out the window, watching the city rush by. You know what's strange? I feel almost nothing for her, neither anger nor affection. It's like she's a stranger I met in another life. It's understandable, Roderick replied. Bonds are formed in daily life, in shared moments. You were only 6 when you separated, and the most formative years of your life were spent with Louisa. Matthew nodded, thoughtful. I sometimes wonder what it would have been like if none of this had happened. If we had continued as a normal family. We can't change the past, Louisa said, repeating the same words she had said to Roderick years earlier, in the garden of the new house. We can only decide what to do with the present we have, and build the future we want, Roderick completed, taking his wife's hand. Matthew observed the gesture with a small smile. There were still difficult days, occasional nightmares, moments of anxiety when someone took too long to come home. The instinctive habit of saving extra food for emergencies, the scars of the past would never completely disappear. But there, in that car, heading towards the home they had built together, was a true family. Not the traditional family Christine had desperately tried to preserve through lies and manipulation, nor the idealized version Roderick had imagined during the years of searching. It was a family forged in adversity, tested by suffering, and finally reunited not by blood ties or legal documents, but by the conscious choice to remain together, supporting each other despite, or perhaps because of, all the shared scars. When they arrived home, Matthew surprised his parents by hugging them simultaneously, something he rarely did since entering adolescence. Thank you, he simply said. For today, for everything. Always, Louisa replied, the word carrying the weight of a promise kept through the darkest years. Always, Roderick echoed, sealing the family pact. That night, while Matthew slept, Louisa and Roderick remained on the veranda, watching the city lights. They had traveled a long way since the fateful day at the landfill, A path of recovery, rediscovery, rebuilding trust, and finally love. Thinking about what? Roderick asked, noticing his wife's distant gaze. How life comes full circle, she replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. 5 years ago I was dying in a canvas shack, certain that Matthew would be the next victim of that life. And now we are here, Roderick completed. And tomorrow we will be too. And the day after, and the day after. Louisa smiled, understanding the implicit promise. It wasn't a fairy tale happily ever after. Real life rarely offered such guarantees. It was something more valuable. The certainty that, no matter what the future held, they would face it together, as the family they chose to be. Inside, Matthew slept peacefully, without nightmares for the first time in many nights. In his dream, he was no longer in the landfill but in an open field, walking under the sun with Louisa and Roderick ahead of him, showing the way. There was no fear, no hunger, no constant burden of daily survival, just the feeling of peace that only comes when one finally finds the place where one truly belongs. And so, as the city slept under the starry sky, 3 souls whom fate separated and reunited in the most improbable way finally rested, not just under the same roof but truly at home. End of story.